Summer, 1940. Europe was collapsing. Nazi armies were advancing across the continent. Thousands of Jewish families were desperate to escape. Every border seemed closed. Every embassy refused to help. For many refugees trapped in Lithuania, time was running out. Then a rumor began to spread. There was a Japanese diplomat in the city of Kaunas, a man who might be willing to issue visas. Day after day, hundreds of frightened families gathered outside the Japanese consulate. They carried passports, documents, photographs, and the hope that someone, somewhere, would show mercy. Inside the building, Japanese diplomat Chiune Sugihara faced an impossible choice. His government had ordered him not to issue visas. If he disobeyed, he could lose his career, his reputation, everything he had worked for. But he was not making this decision alone. Beside him stood his wife, Yukiko. She listened as refugees shared their stories. She watched exhausted parents hold frightened children. She saw fear in their eyes. And when her husband asked what they should do, her answer changed history. She encouraged him to follow his conscience. Together, they made a decision that defied official orders. For weeks, they worked from early morning until late at night, writing visas by hand. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Even as they prepared to leave Lithuania, they continued signing documents. According to witnesses, Chiune kept writing visas from the train window as it pulled away, and Yukiko remained by his side until the very end. Those visas became lifelines. They allowed thousands of Jewish refugees to escape Nazi persecution. Generations later, an estimated tens of thousands of people are alive because of that decision. Yet while the world remembers the diplomat who signed the visas, many have forgotten the woman who helped make it possible. Who was Yukiko Sugihara? Why did she support such a dangerous? And how did one family's courage save thousands of lives? This is the incredible true story of Yukiko Sugihara, the woman history almost forgot. Long before thousands of desperate refugees gathered outside the Japanese consulate in Lithuania, before handwritten visas changed the course of countless lives, before history remembered the name Sugihara, Yukiko was simply a young woman trying to build a meaningful life. Born in Japan during the early years of the 20th century, Yukiko grew up in a country undergoing rapid transformation. Japan was modernizing quickly. New technologies were arriving. Cities were expanding. And opportunities for education were increasing. Yet traditional expectations remained strong. Women were often expected to focus on family life. Few imagined that one day a Japanese woman would play a role in one of World War II's most remarkable humanitarian efforts. From an early age, Yukiko developed a calm and thoughtful personality. She was known for her kindness, her patience, and her ability to understand the feelings of others. These qualities would later become essential during some of the darkest days of the war. As Europe moved toward conflict during the 1930s, Japan was expanding its diplomatic presence around the world. One of the country's rising diplomats was a talented linguist named Chiune Sugihara. Unlike many of his colleagues, he was deeply interested in different cultures and languages. His intelligence and diplomatic skills quickly earned respect within government circles. Fate brought Yukiko and Chiune together during a period of uncertainty and change. Their relationship was built on mutual respect. They shared similar values: compassion, responsibility, and a belief that helping others mattered. After their marriage, Yukiko entered a very different world. The life of a diplomat's wife required constant adaptation. New countries, new languages, new customs, frequent travel, and long periods far from home. It demanded resilience, patience, and quiet strength. Yukiko embraced these challenges. Wherever her husband's assignments took them, she supported him. She observed carefully, learned quickly, and adapted to unfamiliar environments. By the late 1930s, the political situation in Europe had become increasingly dangerous. Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany were expanding their influence across the continent. Jewish families faced growing persecution. New laws stripped them of their rights. Fear spread rapidly. Many people recognized the danger, but few understood how catastrophic events would become. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. World War II had begun. Within months, millions of civilians found themselves trapped by violence and occupation. As Nazi forces advanced across Europe, refugees desperately searched for safe places to go. Borders closed. Governments tightened immigration rules. Hope became harder to find. During this period, Chiune Sugihara received a diplomatic assignment in Lithuania. The Sugihara family moved to the city of Kaunas. At first glance, it seemed like a routine posting. But Lithuania occupied a strategic position between powerful nations. The region had become increasingly unstable. Political tensions were rising. Rumors of war filled the streets. Refugees began arriving in growing numbers. Many had escaped Nazi-occupied Poland. Others were fleeing persecution and violence. Families carried whatever belongings they could manage. Some arrived with suitcases. Others carried only documents and photographs. Nearly all carried fear. From their residence near the Japanese consulate, Yukiko and Chiune witnessed these scenes every day. They saw exhausted parents searching for help. They saw children confused by the chaos around them. They heard stories of separation, of loss, of uncertainty. The refugee crisis was no longer distant news. It was happening directly outside their window. Every morning, more people arrived. Every day, the crowds grew larger. Most had nowhere else to go. They had heard rumors that transit visas could provide a path to safety. Without official documents, escape was impossible. Without help, many feared they would be trapped. As conditions worsened, the Sugiharas faced difficult questions. What responsibility did they have toward these strangers? How much could they risk? And what should they do when official rules conflicted with basic human compassion? Neither Yukiko nor Chiune knew that history was about to place an extraordinary burden on their shoulders. Soon, thousands of desperate refugees would gather outside their door. Soon, the couple would face a choice that could change their lives forever. A choice between obedience and conscience. And when that moment arrived, Yukiko's voice would become more important than ever. By the summer of 1940, thousands of refugees surrounded the Japanese consulate in Kaunas. They needed visas to survive. But Tokyo had given strict instructions. Do not issue them. What happened next would save thousands of lives. As the train carrying the Sugihara family pulled away from Kaunas, hundreds of refugees stood on the platform. Some waved their newly issued visas in the air. Others simply watched in silence. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. But neither the refugees nor the Sugiharas could fully understand the impact of what had just happened. Thousands of handwritten visas were now making their way across Europe. Each one carried hope. Each one represented a chance to survive. And each one existed because two people had chosen conscience over obedience. For the refugees, the journey was far from over. The visas issued by Chiune Sugihara allowed them to travel through Japan. But first, they had to cross thousands of miles of dangerous territory. Many boarded the Trans-Siberian Railway. The journey across the Soviet Union was long and uncertain. Families traveled for days, sometimes weeks. They carried only a few possessions, and the fear that something could still go wrong. At every station, questions waited. At every border, documents were checked. But for those holding Sugihara visas, there was still a path forward. Eventually, many refugees arrived in Japan. Exhausted, relieved, alive. Some stayed temporarily in cities like Kobe. Others continued their journeys to new homes across the world. The Netherlands, Canada, Australia, the United States, Palestine. Entire family lines survived because those visas existed. Meanwhile, the Sugihara family continued their diplomatic assignments. The war spread across continents. Japan entered the conflict. Daily life became increasingly uncertain. For Yukiko, the memories of Kaunas never disappeared. She remembered the frightened faces, the desperate parents, the children waiting outside the consulate gates. She wondered what had happened to them. Did they survive? Did they reach safety? There were no easy answers. Communication during wartime was limited. Years passed without knowing. As the war intensified, the Sugiharas faced their own hardships. Diplomatic life became more dangerous. Resources grew scarce. Travel became difficult. And uncertainty followed them everywhere. In 1944, as Soviet forces advanced across Eastern Europe, Chiune Sugihara and his family were arrested by Soviet authorities in Romania. They were held as prisoners for more than a year. For Yukiko, it was another test of endurance. Another chapter filled with fear and uncertainty. The family had already sacrificed so much. Now they faced an unknown future. Yet even during captivity, neither Yukiko nor Chiune expressed regret about the decision they had made in Lithuania. They understood the cost, but they also understood the value of a human life. After the war ended, the Sugiharas returned to Japan. The country they came home to had changed dramatically. Cities lay in ruins. The economy struggled, and life had to begin again. Not long after returning, Chiune left the Japanese Foreign Service. Many historians believe his actions in Lithuania contributed to the end of his diplomatic career. Though the exact reasons remain debated, the consequences of defying official orders were impossible to ignore. For the Sugiharas, life after the war was modest. There was no public recognition, no ceremonies, no headlines celebrating what they had done. Most people knew nothing about the visas. The story remained largely unknown. Years passed quietly. Yukiko focused on her family. She supported her husband through financial difficulties and personal challenges. Together, they carried their memories in silence. Occasionally, letters began to arrive. Messages from people whose lives had been saved. Children who had grown into adults. Parents who had lived to see grandchildren. Families who existed because someone had chosen compassion during humanity's darkest hour. Each letter carried the same message. Thank you. For Yukiko, these moments confirmed what she had always believed. That kindness matters. That courage is often quiet. And that the right decision is not always the easiest one. The world may remember the signatures on the visas. But behind every signature stood a woman who offered strength, support, and moral courage. Without Yukiko's encouragement, history might have been very different. Because sometimes, saving lives begins with a simple question. What does your conscience tell you to do? And sometimes, the person who changes history is not the one holding the pen, but the one giving someone the courage to use it. For decades, the world barely knew the Sugihara's story. The visas had saved thousands. Yet the people who issued them lived in silence. How did the world finally discover their extraordinary act of courage? And why did recognition come so late? By the summer of 1940, the city of Kaunas, Lithuania, had become a place of fear. Every day, more refugees arrived. Many were Jewish families fleeing Nazi persecution. Others had escaped occupied Poland. All of them shared the same desperate question. How could they get out? For most refugees, the answer seemed impossible. Borders were closing. Countries refused entry. Embassies turned people away. Time was running out. Outside the Japanese consulate, Hundreds of men, women, and children gathered in growing numbers. They carried passports, letters, photographs, small suitcases containing what remained of their lives. Some slept on the sidewalks. Others waited for hours, hoping someone inside would listen. From the windows of the consulate, Yukiko Sugihara watched the crowds. She saw exhausted mothers comforting frightened children. She saw fathers desperately searching for answers. She heard stories of families separated by war. Every face carried the same expression: fear and hope. Inside the consulate, Chiune Sugihara studied the situation carefully. There was one possible way to help: transit visas. These documents would allow refugees to travel through Japan on their way to safer destinations. But there was a problem. Japanese government regulations required strict conditions before visas could be issued. Most refugees did not meet those requirements. Chiune contacted officials in Tokyo. He explained the humanitarian crisis. He requested permission to issue the visas. The answer came back quickly. No. He asked again. Once more. The answer was no. A third request produced the same response: do not issue the visas. For Chiune, the decision was devastating. As a diplomat, he had spent his career following instructions. Disobeying orders could end everything: his job, his reputation, his future. The consequences might also affect his family. That evening, Chiune discussed the situation with Yukiko. Together, they considered the risks. They talked about their responsibilities, their fears, and the people waiting outside. Yukiko listened carefully. She understood exactly what was at stake. But she also understood something else. Doing nothing would have consequences too. Later, she recalled the heartbreaking scenes she had witnessed. The children, the families, the desperation. When Chiune asked for her opinion, Yukiko encouraged him to follow his conscience. Rules mattered, but human lives mattered more. It was not an easy decision. It was a choice that could change their lives forever. Yet, together, they made it. The next morning, Chiune began writing visas by hand, one after another, hour after hour. Yukiko remained beside him, helping organize documents, supporting him physically and emotionally, managing the endless flow of applicants. The work was exhausting. They started early in the morning, often continuing late into the night. Their hands cramped, their eyes burned from exhaustion. Still, they continued. Outside the consulate, the crowds grew larger. Word spread quickly. There was a diplomat willing to help. There was still hope. Each visa represented a chance to survive, a chance to escape, a chance to build a future. For weeks, the Sugiharas worked without rest. Chiune wrote thousands of visas by hand. Yukiko helped coordinate the process. Together, they transformed official documents into lifelines. Every signature carried risk. Every stamp defied orders. Every completed visa challenged bureaucracy with compassion. Eventually, the Japanese government ordered the consulate to close. The Sugiharas prepared to leave Lithuania. But even then, they refused to stop. At the hotel before their departure, Chiune continued signing visas. At the train station, he kept writing, according to witnesses. As the train began to move, he handed completed visas through the window to waiting refugees. Yukiko remained beside him until the final moment, watching as hopeful hands reached toward the train, watching as pieces of paper became promises of survival. The train pulled away. The station disappeared into the distance. But the impact of their decision was only beginning. Thousands of refugees now held documents that could help them escape Nazi-controlled Europe. Many would travel across the Soviet Union, then through Japan, eventually reaching safety in other countries. Generations later, Entire families would exist because of those handwritten visas. Yet the danger for the Sugiharas was far from over. The war continued, and the consequences of defying orders had not disappeared. Soon, they would discover the personal cost of choosing humanity over obedience. Thousands now carried visas signed by Chiune Sugihara, but none of it would have happened without Yukiko's support. As the war intensified, the Sugihara family would soon face the consequences of their decision. Would saving strangers cost them everything? For years, the story remained hidden. The visas that had saved thousands of lives. The long days inside the consulate. The difficult choice between obedience and conscience. Few people knew any of it. After returning to Japan, the Sugihara family lived quietly. There were no celebrations, no public honors, no interviews, no monuments. The world moved on. World War II became history. New conflicts emerged. New headlines replaced old memories. And the extraordinary events in Kaunas slowly faded from public attention. Yukiko focused on family life. She supported Chiune through difficult years. Without his diplomatic career, finding stable work was not easy. The family adjusted to a simpler life. Despite financial challenges, they rarely spoke publicly about what had happened in Lithuania. For them, helping others had never been about recognition. It had been about doing the right thing. Meanwhile, across the world, the people saved by the Sugihara visas were building new lives. Children grew up. Families expanded. Businesses were created. Communities flourished. Many survivors told their children and grandchildren about the Japanese diplomat who had given them hope, and about the family who stood beside him. But for decades, these stories remained personal memories, not public history. Then, something remarkable happened. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, survivors began searching for the man who had saved them. They wanted to say thank you. Some had spent years trying to discover what had happened to the Sugihara family. Eventually, former refugees located Chiune in Japan. Letters arrived. Phone calls followed. Reunions took place. For the first time, the Sugiharas began to understand the full impact of their actions. Thousands of people had survived. Thousands more had been born because of those visas. Entire generations existed because one family chose compassion over fear. Yukiko listened as survivors shared their stories. Stories of escape. Stories of survival. Stories of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Every life represented a choice made in 1940. A choice she had helped make. As awareness grew, historians began investigating the events in Kaunas. Documents were examined. Testimonies were collected. The story spread beyond survivor communities. The world finally started paying attention. In 1985, more than 4 decades after the visas were issued, Chiune Sugihara received one of the world's highest honors. Yad Vashem recognized him as one of the righteous among the nations. The title is given to non-Jewish individuals who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. It was a historic moment, but many people understood something important. Chiune had not acted alone. Yukiko had been there from the beginning. She had listened to the refugees, supported the decision, helped organize the endless flow of documents, encouraged her husband when the consequences seemed overwhelming. Without her strength, the outcome might have been very different. Yet, as often happens in history, the contributions of women remained in the background. Many books focused only on the diplomat. Many articles mentioned only the signatures. But survivors remembered. They knew the story was bigger than one person. They remembered Yukiko, the woman who had helped transform compassion into action, the woman who had chosen conscience over comfort. As the years passed, museums created exhibits. Schools taught the story. Documentaries explored the events in Kaunas. Memorials honored the Sugihara family. And slowly, Yukiko's role began receiving the recognition it deserved. She continued sharing memories of those difficult days, not to seek praise, but to preserve an important lesson. That ordinary people can make extraordinary choices. That courage often happens quietly. And that sometimes the most important voices are the ones encouraging others to do what is right. By speaking about their experiences, Yukiko ensured future generations would understand the human side of history. Not just the politics, not just the documents, but the compassion behind them. Because behind every visa was a family. Behind every signature was a life. And behind every act of courage, there was a choice. A choice to help. Even when the cost was uncertain. Even when the future was unclear. Even when the world said no. Thousands survived because of the Sugihara's decision. But what legacy did Yukiko leave behind? How many lives were changed by her courage? And why does her story still matter today? The answer reaches far beyond World War II. More than 80 years have passed since the summer of 1940. But the decision made inside a small Japanese consulate in Kaunas still echoes around the world. Thousands of frightened refugees once stood outside those gates, unsure if they would survive. Most had lost their homes. Many had lost family members. Almost all had lost hope. Then one family chose to act. Not because it was easy. Not because it was safe. But because it was right. For decades, the world focused on the visas, the signatures, the diplomat who issued them. And rightly so. But history is rarely shaped by one person alone. Behind every decision made by Chiune Sugihara, there was someone standing beside him, listening, encouraging, supporting. That person was Yukiko Sugihara. When the orders from Tokyo said no, she chose compassion. When the risks seemed overwhelming, she chose courage. When fear could have remained silent, she chose to speak. And because she did, thousands of lives were changed forever. Historians estimate that around 6,000 refugees received Sugihara visas. But the story does not end there. Those survivors built new lives across the world. They became teachers, doctors, artists, business owners, parents, grandparents. Today, their children and grandchildren number in the tens of thousands. Entire family trees exist because one couple refused to ignore human suffering. This is known as the Sugihara survivors. A living legacy of courage. A reminder that one decision can change the future in ways we may never fully understand. As awareness of the Sugihara's actions grew, memorials were created in their honor. Museums preserved their story. Schools taught new generations about the power of moral courage. Across Japan, Lithuania, Israel, and many other countries, people continue to remember what happened in Kaunas. Yet Yukiko's contribution offers a lesson that goes beyond history. Her story reminds us that not all heroes stand in the spotlight. Not all heroes hold positions of power. Sometimes, the most important person in the room is the one who gives someone else the strength to do what is right. Her courage was quiet. Her influence was invisible to many. But its impact was extraordinary. In later years, Yukiko spoke about the difficult choices her family faced. She remembered the long hours, the endless lines of refugees, the uncertainty, the fear. But she never spoke with regret, because she believed that helping others was never the wrong decision, even when it came with personal sacrifice, even when the future was unknown. Yukiko Sugihara passed away in 2008, but her legacy lives on, not only through museums and memorials, but through every family that exists because of her compassion, through every child, every grandchild, and every generation that followed. Her story asks a simple question. What would we do if we faced the same choice? Would we follow instructions? Or would we follow our conscience? Because history is not shaped only by leaders and armies. Sometimes, it is shaped by ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. People who choose humanity over fear, kindness over silence, compassion over convenience. Yukiko Sugihara never considered herself a hero, but for thousands of families around the world, she always will be. When the world closed its doors, Yukiko Sugihara helped open a window of hope. She never signed the visas, but she helped make them possible. And because she chose compassion over fear, thousands escaped the darkness of war. Some heroes change history with their actions. Others change it with their courage to say, "This is the right thing to do." Her name was Yukiko Sugihara, and her kindness still lives on today.